Good morning. Happy Easter, everyone, and welcome to worship with the community of First Unitarian Church of Omaha. I'm Reverend Shari Woodbury, the minister here. Whether you're attending online or here in the sanctuary, on Sunday morning or later in the week, I'm glad you have chosen to plug into this community and be part of what we're doing together here. We come together each week to worship, which from the Latin means to remember that which is of worth. And so we reground ourselves in our highest values every Sunday. A special welcome to visitors. This is a community of all ages and abilities. It's a community with a rainbow of gender and sexual identities. This congregation is a community of diverse cultural and class backgrounds. We draw from many different sources of inspiration and share common liberal religious values. Whoever you may be, we welcome you to bring your whole self into this community. If you are a visitor and you'd like to get on our email list or learn more about the congregation, there are little clipboards in front of you there in the pew that you can use. There's a similar form online for those who are joining us that way. For those online, I encourage you to create a YouTube account and sign in whenever you participate that way. This will allow you to participate in the service, including for joys and concerns. Of course, everyone's invited to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if something touches you or you think it might make a positive difference in the life of someone you know, you can share that link with others. For those here in person, after the service, every Sunday we have coffee hour for fellowship and conversation with various beverages and usually some snacks. That's downstairs in the common room, which is immediately directly below the sanctuary here. One brief announcement. As many of you know, this congregation took a stand, it's been a year and a half ago now, on reproductive justice and wanting to preserve our rights here in the state of Nebraska for bodily autonomy for pregnant people. We have a representative here from the Protect Our Rights Coalition who will be in the common room. If you haven't yet signed the petition to protect those rights in the Constitution of Nebraska, and if you're a Nebraska resident and would like to do that, you are welcome to sign that petition during fellowship time. Oh, and there we give a wave back there. Yeah, I see she's got all kinds of good information too. Thank you for being here. To learn about other activities you might want to take part in around First Unitarian, you can use the QR code or the links in the program. There also are some printed e-news from Friday in the foyer next to the screen that you can grab on your way out. Our church occupies the traditional treaty lands of the Omaha and Otoe-Missouri tribal nations whose sovereignty existed long before the state of Nebraska. We'd also like to express our respect to other native tribes of Nebraska, including the Ponca, Winnebago, and Santee Sioux, as well as many others represented in the Omaha metro area. Our aspiration is to let the land acknowledgement be just a beginning as we educate ourselves and support causes, charities, and rights of Indigenous peoples in our areas. Again, welcome to worship. And advance thanks to our guest musician, member Connie DeFazio, on flute today. At this time, I invite forward Jim Daniels to light the flaming chalice. You can find the chalice lighting words in your order service or in the inside front cover of the gray hymnal. All together. Spark of the Spirit, cupped in earth's embrace, light of love, alive in all creation. As we kindle this flame, we rekindle our connection to the sacred web of life. Thank you, Jim. Spirit of life, you have held us together through a season of death, pain, and decay. But even after the longest night, joy comes in the morning. As the days grow warmer and longer, as leaves appear on the trees and green shoots come into flower, we celebrate the power of love over hate. And that even places marked by death can become fertile ground for new life to rise up again. Alleluia. Come, let us worship together. I invite you to rise if that feels good in your body and join in singing our opening hymn, number 61, Lo, the Earth Awakes Again. Okay, children are invited forward to hear A Time for All Ages. Dan Sullivan and Lynn Thompson are telling the story today, so I suspect there may be puppets.
Hello, children. Today, Doc Science and Ray the Baker will discuss generosity.
There's also March for a good bridge. Hi, Doc. I brought you some fresh donuts.
Hi, Ray. I always love your donuts. It's very generous of you to give them to me.
It makes me feel good to be generous. It's very generous. Have you been busy hiding eggs for the children? Why do you do that?
I like to give children Easter eggs. It makes the day special for them, and it makes me feel really good.
Children, do you feel good when you're generous to someone else? Yes? How does giving things to others make you feel? Okay, it feels good for all of us.
It's called generosity, or being generous. When we are generous, it affects us, and scientists say we make a little bit of a special chemical in our heads that makes us feel really good, as though we're riding a bike or winning a game.
Then let me see if I could give you something. We both would feel good that way. Well, yesterday out by my bakery, I found a rat. I think I could give that rat to you.
Well, I have two rats. I'd give you both of them.
Then we both feel good. That's what I mean by generosity. We give people presents. We give people presents on special occasions. And if we give something away, it not only makes the person happy that we give it to, it makes us happy too.
It doesn't have to be a special occasion. We can be generous every day. It could be your time or your attention, like helping an old person cross the street, or just saying hello to someone you meet. Children, can you think of a time when you were generous? What did you do or say to help someone?
Anybody was generous this week? Yes.
Anybody else?
Did you do something?
You were generous? When is the time that you shared your time with someone?
Yes.
I went to one of my friends' houses.
That's nice.
Suppose you get some eggs or a bunny rabbit or something like that for Christmas. What will you do with it? Will you keep all the candy yourself? Or will you give some to your little brothers and sisters? Or even your grandpa, hopefully?
Did you share your candy? For yourself. Grace, you were sharing candy this morning.
Lots of people feel left out. Maybe they didn't get chosen for a club or picked first, number one. Little short people like me, they don't usually get picked first to play football or baseball. It's important to recognize that even just saying hi to someone can make them feel better.
Everybody wants the world to know that they're here. So smile at people when you meet them and say hi when it's the right thing to do.
I remember that long ago my dad told me not to talk to strangers. But when you're at church or at school, these people are our friends. It would be okay to at least smile and be cheerful around them. That would be generous of your time.
There are lots of people who are generous. I'm going to tell you a story now about something that happened very close to where we are in the pioneer days. North of Omaha, there's a Native American tribe called the Ponca. And many years ago, there was a very old man who was a janitor at this church, and he told the Reverend Ronald Mapp, one of our previous ministers, a story about the Ponca. He said that when he was a little boy living over in Iowa on a farm, the Ponca would come through every year, and they would go on a big hunt in order to get enough food to feed the tribe during the winter. And the tribe came through that spring, and they had not been able to find enough food, and they were starving. They were really hungry. And you know what the boy's father did? He gave the Native Americans the last of the salt
Both?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So both the Native Americans and the farmer and the father were generous, weren't they? So that's a wonderful thing. The wonderful people who built this church were generous. The teachers in your church school, the people who provide coffee and cookies, the choir, all the people, the person who plays the piano, the people who run the sound system, all the people who make this church work for us are generous. You can be generous too. So children, you may go to your classes now, or whatever else your teachers have planned for you.
Wait, just a minute.
Remember to help your father set the table for dinner.
And remember to try and think about being generous every day. Generous with things and with your time. And Baker brought an Easter egg for each one of you, so if you'd like to come up and have an Easter egg this
One
morning.
Easter egg, just one.
Oh, good. Oh, can you take one? Yes. And you may have it. I didn't make that though.
Kids are going to have some fun with Easter eggs now. And next we hear from another dear friend of the congregation, Sarah Voss.
Good morning. Happy Easter. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Voss. I am a retired but still active UU community minister affiliated with this church. I'm happy to share a little of my church story with you today. My first religious experience was entirely based at the Congregational Church in the Little Farm community in northeastern Ohio, where I grew up. Our family faithfully attended every Sunday. My father was a deacon. My mother was a member of the ladies' circle. My siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins all attended. It was a conservative, rural church experience with ministers who emphasized biblical lessons and a creed that lifted up Jesus Christ, and an atmosphere that was warm and welcoming and very white. If we were racial or anti-Semitic or homophobic or otherwise oppressive, I certainly didn't know it. Nonetheless, I left this church of my youth after I finished high school. Later, I was married in front of the fireplace in our farmhouse rather than in front of the church altar. I had children who were never baptized and in general gave up all religious experience. I thought then of religion as directive and restrictive rather than as a holder of hope. And I basically avoided church as much as possible until the day in the mid-1980s when I came through those front doors and sat down, rather skeptically, and close to the back, as close as I could get to the back on the west side of this church, of this sanctuary. The Reverend Ron Knapp, now our emeritus minister, delivered a sermon that first day, which was based entirely on the poetry of May Sarton. I was amazed. I'd never considered the possibility of a sermon that was entirely based on art, current art, too. It felt strange, but somehow freeing. Surprise, joy. I came back the next Sunday, then came back again, and eventually became a UU minister myself, something I'd never, ever thought would happen, and which, according to my then brother-in-law, should never, ever have happened because I was a woman, and women shouldn't be ministers. Half a year or so before I came to this church, I'd found myself meeting regularly with a small group of women who were interested in writing and gathered for support. As I grew to know them, I grew to appreciate the independence of thought which they displayed. One day, I was feeling rather discouraged, and one of them, Loretta Johnson, some of you remember, invited me to visit her church. "You might be surprised," she said. Loretta was a Unitarian. She still is, though now she's a Minnesota UU. I'd never heard of Unitarians. It turned out that all the women in this little group were Unitarians. Their openness and invitation were life changers. If you are new or relatively new to this church, you will likely find a kind of spiritual freedom you may never have known before here. You will find challenge, encouragement, support, maybe even a new understanding of God or goddess or Great Spirit, love, hope, wisdom, compassion, along with the freedom to label that spiritual insight as you wish. If you are not new to this church, remember that all these things are here for you too. This is not to say that I or any of us agree with everything we hear and find at this church. There's controversy here. There's dispute, disappointment, hurt feelings, and all that stuff that is a part of everyday living. What I love most about being a UU, though, is the support that is available when it is needed, and the freedom we all have to make our own way through this spiritual journey we call life. When Doug Lee Regier asked me to offer the stewardship moment this morning, I knew he meant for me to say something about money, specifically the part about giving it. Money is one form of math, and as many of you know, if you've ever heard me preach, I like to use math as a tool for growing spiritually. Unitarian Universalism is one religion, one religious place that permits and even encourages this and many other such open and exploratory issues. So please make sure you give money as you are able to our UU Church for the freedom of the spiritual voice which it claims.
Thank you, Sarah. We're very fortunate to have Reverend Voss as an affiliated community minister of this congregation. And moving into our weekly practice of generosity, every week we share with others through a community offering. Half of the undesignated gifts are given to a local cause which resonates with our Unitarian Universalist values. If you're online, you prefer to give with your smartphone, you can use the QR code or the link. For the month of March, our Share the Plate recipient is All People's Pantry. This is a pantry that provides culturally appropriate foods to the greater Omaha Council Bluffs metro area, to the intercultural community whose needs are not met by traditional pantries. They work with churches, health organizations, and nonprofits to not only provide food, but create a space to care for the whole person, where diverse cultures feel comfortable, safe, and supported. The offering is gratefully received this Easter morning. Come to the time for that sharing that Sarah just mentioned, where we care for each other. And one of the ways we do that is simply sharing the things that are going on in our lives, those joys that can uplift others with us, and those challenges that others may want to support us through. Colin, what did we receive online?
We have quite a few today, so let's get started. From Douglas Lee Regier, he says, I'm grateful to be able to join you via YouTube Today, from our cabin in the woods at Creighton Retreat Center. From Lita Magisana, she says River became a certified CNA this past Monday and had his first official day on the job. From the Iman family, Eleanor and Meredith turned 3 today. Happy birthday of the twins. From Terry Lynn Brewer and Patricia Pyatt, our friend and visitor Hattie's grandson had emergency surgery. We lift him up to have a full and speedy recovery. From Erica Irwin, she says, I would like to offer public appreciation to Elaine Wells, Jean Wagner, Terry Lynn Brewer, and Kaylin Goldner for giving their time and compassionate spirits for the last 5 Saturdays. During these Right Relations Covenant meetings, we shared, learned, and got to know one another more deeply. They were well attended, well run, and deeply connecting. Thank you, ladies, for giving us the space we didn't know we needed. From Lynn Thompson, the church garden looks so lovely today. I would like to thank Sharon Conlon for all the work she does to make it beautiful for all of us. And once again, I would like to repeat from Dave Richardson, you said this earlier, a petition to place on the ballot in November a Nebraska constitutional amendment guaranteeing a woman's reproductive rights. The petition will be available in the common room during coffee hour. Please look for Carol Ramsey or Dave Richardson or the lady in the back that we just saw. And our congregation has voted to give its support to abortion rights. That's it.
As we call into our circle of care all of those who know both joys and difficulties, I invite you to sing along if you like with number 391, Voice Still and Small. On the wings of this music, I invite you into a time of contemplation. You may wish to check your posture, gently close your eyes, and make your hands comfortable in your lap. After a common prayer, we will hold a time of shared silence, which I'll end with the sound of the bell. Voice still and small, as we turn inward, we listen for you. Deep inside all, this Easter morning, we open our hearts to hear you in the figure of Jesus. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, his followers continued to hear the still voice of pure love. In the uncertain days after his cruel death, the memory of his words surely comforted them. The quiet voices of one another, the tender holding one another through grief, accompanied them. And through all the years, they held on to his voice, and they found their own voices. Holy spark within us all, may we too hear the voices of love, voices that the powers would drown out even still today if they could. May we too notice the stirring of conscience, the rustling of compassion within ourselves. Whether the voice speaks to us of our neighbor who is hungry, or the young people yearning to be accepted as they are, or the tragedies unfolding overseas, let us not shut it out. The voice of truth and courage sings through all the years when we are open to hear that voice and to be that voice. It matters not how long it has been dormant in us. The voice, still and small, can be resurrected at any time. Easter is listening, hearing, heeding, and being that voice. Let us celebrate it thus. Amen. A time for your own silent reflection or prayer. I share an Easter reading from my colleague Luke Stevens-Royer. This is the day, one of so many days, when love comes to life again, when death is overcome, ashamed at its weakness against the bright blaze of light and the resplendent resiliency of life. This is the day, one of so many days, when memories of gratitude, hope, joy, laughter, and love break through the hard memories of grief, sorrow, and loss. The day when the life lost becomes a living spirit in community, in hearts and hands, voices and vision, by name and presence and possibility. This is the day, one of so many days, when the sun breaks through the sheets of clouds and renews the face of the earth with green blades and budding petals, running water, and bird song. This is the day, one of so many days, when we gather together and proclaim with the strength of our heart's song of hope, love has come again. Life has come again. Hope has come again. So let the people rise again like wheat arising green. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. The miracle of Easter is not the Easter bunny delighting children or the blooming flowers of spring. The miracle of Easter, I contend, and you're free to disagree with me as you heard, is not what happened to Jesus after his cruel death. The miracle of Easter is what happened among his followers, who did something courageous and improbable in the face of devastating grief and naked imperial power. In the Christian tradition, Easter morning begins in sorrow. Jesus' life ended just a couple of days before, almost as dramatically as it began. You may know the Christmas story of baby Jesus born in Bethlehem in the shadow of the Roman Empire. Born in Bethlehem, a city in what is now part of the West Bank of Palestine. The son of a carpenter, the Jewish baby grows up to be a teacher and prophet. He proclaims a message of radical love that embraces even the most misunderstood and despised people in his society. Captured by the Roman Empire, who deem him and his teachings a threat to their hierarchical order, Jesus is crucified on what comes to be known as Good Friday. Historical accounts attest to these basic facts. As to what happens next, it depends on who you listen to. The Christian Bible depicts several women close to Jesus going to his tomb to anoint his body, as is customary. Distraught over the loss of their dear teacher, the most loving and inspiring person they have known, the women approach the tomb, only to find that the stone that had previously sealed it shut is already rolled away. What's more, Jesus' beaten body, recently laid to rest there, is nowhere to be found. For up from the grave he arose. As mainstream Christianity has long told it, Jesus was up and around, resurrected in body, walking and talking again with his disciples for an extraordinary period of time. But there have always been other ways of understanding the life and death of Jesus. I suggest to you that the miracle of Easter has less to do with the resurrection of Jesus' body than it does the unstoppability of the way of living, the way of loving that he had modeled and nurtured wherever he went. That way of living and loving contained much generosity. Here I'm referring to one of the new ways of articulating Unitarian Universalist core values that our delegates will vote on at our National General Assembly in June. This is a generosity that invites us to freely and compassionately share our faith, our presence, and our resources, connecting us to one another in a spirit of mutuality. As Jesus did throughout his life, clear through to the Last Supper that he shared with his disciples. Indeed, whatever else happened after Easter, I'll agree that many of Jesus' followers continued to build communities of mutual uplift. They did not all stay in the same place. They carried this way of being to new places, inviting more people to live in the way that Jesus had shown them, where people of all genders, all abilities, different economic strata, various ethnic groups, all came together as one community. This was radical. As communities, they broke bread together and cared for those in need. They shared their resources, their presence, and their faith with one another as equals. They embodied Jesus' spirit, as Stevens Royer put it, a living spirit in community, and hearts and hands, voices and vision, by name and presence and possibility. This was exactly the sort of countercultural activity that the Roman Empire had wanted to stop by killing Jesus. But his followers kept on doing it. In fact, momentum only grew over time. Jesus had preached that such communities could build the kingdom of heaven right here on earth through practices of mutual presence and caring. In contrast to the greed, the arrogance, the hard-heartedness, and the violence endemic all around them, those he left behind tried to practice mercy, humility, and compassion. And here I want to share with you another of the values that is up for a vote in June, which I see the early communities of Jesus followers as embodying. Jesus taught in the Beatitudes that blessed are the peacemakers. This can be understood as working for the holistic well-being of both individuals and communities, even one's enemies. For Jesus taught others to love thy enemy. His followers built up alternative communities on such radical principles, seeking to preserve and pass on what they had experienced with him. It seems fitting to me that this year, two noteworthy days coincide on the calendar today. Easter falls on March 31st this year, and March 31st every year is Transgender Day of Visibility. I don't know if you've heard of this day. International Trans Day of Visibility has been observed on March 31st every year since 2010. It was started by a trans advocate in Michigan, Rachel Crandall, to celebrate the lives and contributions of trans people, while also drawing attention to the poverty, discrimination, and violence the community faces. I can't help thinking that if Jesus walked among us today, surely he would be appalled by the disrespect, dehumanization, and persecution of transgender people today, just as he stood up for the widows, orphans, prostitutes, and others who suffered scorn and oppression in his time. If Easter is a time to celebrate people living out their fullest, best, most authentic selves, as Jesus did and his followers continue to do, then it is a fabulous time to celebrate transgender people being who God made them to be, who they are inside, despite the efforts of the keepers of the status quo to pull them down. Can I get an amen? Yeah. When Rachel Crandall started Transgender Day of Visibility, she was discouraged by the way media coverage of trans people focused on violence. She wanted to create a day for people to celebrate the lives of transgender people while still acknowledging that due to discrimination, not every trans person can be or wants to be visible. And this goal connects with a final value I'd like to lift up today: reason. This is the other one added for consideration through the congregational amendment process this year. So if you hadn't heard of the peace and reason values, they came into the process relatively recently. This proposed value calls for the search for truth and meaning to be informed by reason, evidence, and science, rooted in wonder, curiosity, and compassion. Indeed, science has helped us understand the complexity of gender in ways that previous generations did not have access to. And of course, the curiosity and compassion that lead to listening to others and respecting their lived experience and knowledge continues to be an indispensable path to understanding the diversity of gender identities that are part of the human experience. This Easter, as I contemplate Easter, I see how mutual presence was essential among the followers of Jesus, not only during his lifetime, but after it. And I'm curious to explore the different ways that people understood the good news of Jesus in the centuries immediately following that first Easter. It took time for the church to be established as an institution. At first, there were no canons, no creeds, no cardinals, no cathedrals, only groups of people trying to understand and practice the teachings of Jesus, trying to make meaning for themselves of his life and death, trying to share it with others. I'd especially like to hear from those voices who did not prevail in history. The lesser-known perspectives are often labeled as Gnostic. Have you heard this word? Maybe unfamiliar to some. In her book, What is Gnosticism?, Karen King, a scholar at Harvard Divinity School, quickly makes clear that the term itself is misleading. She writes, "Gnosticism is a term invented in the early modern period to aid in defining the boundaries of normative Christianity. Gnosticism has been constructed largely as the heretical other in relation to Orthodox Christianity." Now, if anybody here identifies as a heretic, this should perk your ears up. That leads to the question, what then is orthodox? Orthodox means true doctrine. So those who claim the label orthodox are making a claim about the superiority and correctness of their beliefs. Humans are meaning-making creatures, and we weave webs of meaning with whatever cultural resources are at hand. But when looking at which ideas triumph over others, I think we do well to heed the philosopher Foucault, who observed that history is not about truth, but about power relations of domination. In other words, the winners write the history books. The winners write some of the theology sometimes too. So we should not be surprised that those bearing the label orthodox are the ones who won, and that those who lost, the Gnostics, have been widely maligned and misunderstood. Now, while Gnosticism includes a variety of ideas and practices that sprung up in relation to the Jesus tradition, and one Gnostic sect might look quite different from another, they do have some features in common. Now I turn to Princeton scholar Elaine Pagels and her book, The Gnostic Gospels, in which she explains that gnosis refers to an intuitive process of knowing oneself. That's the basis for that word, Gnostic. So those writing and using Gnostic texts believed that by knowing who we really are, we know the ultimate reality, what some call God. This understanding was not part of the common teaching shared openly in the early churches. People had to be initiated into particular, you might say, study groups or practice circles to gain access to it. I speculate that if the Orthodox leaders had not been so intent on tamping down on diversity, those attracted to Gnostic approaches might not have needed to do so in secret. In any case, Pagels asserts that the Orthodox, rather than those they called heretics, initiated the break between them. Followers of Gnostic teachers like Valentinus were pushed out of the church. They didn't want to leave, they were forced to leave. That should sound familiar to anyone who knows their Unitarian history. This was at least in part because their more complex, augmented understanding of certain ideas and stories, including who God is, undermined the authority of the bishops. Within their own circles, these practitioners adopted egalitarian leadership. They avoided lay clergy divides and kept women on equal footing with men. Gnostic groups also had more of a yin-yang understanding of God as an entity incorporating both masculine and feminine powers. Many of those who've come to be known as church fathers systematically argued against, banned, and destroyed the Gnostic writings, defining orthodoxy and heresy in ways that, whatever else may have motivated them, served their political goals too. From a desire to unify the church, to standardize it, they raised the diversity and created structures, canon, creed, apostolic succession, which made it possible to maintain a high degree of uniformity in the church. That not only made it easier to manage the church as one unit, but introduced a hierarchy and a doctrinal narrowness into the tradition, which I think would have made Jesus turn over in his grave if he were still in it. Now, I joke, but to me the irony is it's very heavy. It's really too much. Jesus had been persecuted by the powers that be for living and teaching his understandings that were in direct confrontation to empire. But then the church that claimed to be his only authentic line of transmission turned around and did the same thing to other adherents, crushing their teachings, their attempt to live by the Spirit of Jesus as they understood it. Which church was the true church is in the eye of the beholder. While Orthodox church fathers were busy shoring up episcopal authority for the sake of unity, Gnostic Christians emphasized loving relationships between members. They believed that those who understood spiritual truth, or gnosis, were the true church. Some taught that these few could teach the many Christians and help them to seek after God and attain this gnosis. Again, they didn't leave the church until they were forced underground. But the differences between the groups were not simply around hierarchy versus egalitarianism and political structures. Gnostics believed that we can arrive at the same insight and attain the same sort of spiritual enlightenment, awareness of our true nature, as Jesus did. Gnostic sources tend to understand Jesus' death and resurrection in metaphorical or mythical terms rather than literally. For example, here's how Pagels describes the depiction of Jesus' death in several Gnostic texts. Quote, "The historical occurrence of the crucifixion is not denied, but in the Apocalypse of Peter, the cross has no sin-saving function." In another text, the first Apocalypse of James, the point of the crucifixion was to expose the impotence and arrogance of the world rulers. In the Apocryphon of James, fearlessness in the face of death demonstrates that the body is not the self, only the soul will be saved. Once the disciples understand their true spiritual nature, they will not fear suffering or death. Their salvation hinges on loving and enlightening others. Like you use today, Gnostics also saw revelation as a continuous process, not limited to those who are said to have witnessed Jesus' end and resurrection and forever frozen, but available to any who have spiritual visions. Whereas faith for the Orthodox Christian was synonymous with doctrinal conformity, Gnostic spirituality was characterized by direct experience, which is one of our foundational sources as Unitarian Universalists, and by the creativity inherent with that direct experience, with what some might call contact with spirit. Thus, Gnostics did not see a diversity of ideas and practices as a threat. For them, it was a reflection of the rich and varied ways that spirit might operate through people's lives. We're all different, so why wouldn't we experience spirituality and spiritual insight in a variety of ways? Orthodox Christians and Gnostics also diagnosed the essential problem of human life differently. So it's no wonder they sought different solutions. While the Orthodox saw the problem as sin, Gnostics saw ignorance as the fundamental issue. Thus, for them, knowledge rather than forgiveness was the solution. For the Orthodox Christian, salvation meant the coming of the kingdom of God on earth at some future time in some literal way. But for Gnostics, salvation meant experiencing right now the kingdom that is already within you, having direct knowledge or gnosis of our unity and living from that unity here and now. From this point of view, much of what is presented as Jesus' teaching in the Orthodox canon of the Bible is not exactly wrong, but it's incomplete. You might say unripe. Pagels points out that a program of spiritual practices such as Gnostics carried out, quote, would appeal only to a few. To the religious perspectives and methods of Gnosticism did not lend themselves to mass religion. For the Gnostics, Jesus was, Pagels says, a guide who opens access to spiritual understanding. If you're willing to put in the work of engaging in the study and the spiritual practices that can help you attain insight. The more I have studied the Gnostic streams that emerged out of the Jesus tradition, the more I have been struck by the way that many of these so-called heretical positions that were suppressed then parallel ideas later voiced by Unitarians, Universalists, and other radical Christians. I want to go back to Karen King, who observed that many Gnostic ideas and practices were maintained inside of Christianity, and indeed continue to evoke devotion and controversy down to the present day. She lists the following as examples, quoting here from Karen King. The portrayal of Jesus as a teacher of divine wisdom, a Gnostic idea also held by many early Unitarians and Universalists. The power of his words and deeds to transform lives. The understanding of his crucifixion as a call to overcome ignorance and suffering. The resurrection as a triumph over unjust domination. The authority of the prophetic spirit. The continued enactment of women's leadership and theology making, despite continued oppression. And the paving of a mystical path to God through knowledge and love. So to me, Unitarian Universalism is one successor of this alternate Christian tradition. And if we value what Jesus taught and how he lived, our task is not simply to part ways with any orthodox teachings that we find problematic, and I know many of us here have gone through some kind of process of doing that. Our task is also to actively claim those alternative understandings that can be resurrected in our own lives. Teachings that can help us live by the values of generosity, reason, and peace. So this Easter, I invite you to reclaim the promise of this lesser-trod path of Jesus' followers. Let us resurrect in our own lives the direct knowledge of our unity and the radical love for all people that rings down the ages in the life and teachings of Jesus. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to rise for our closing hymn, number 344, A Promise Through the Ages Rings.
Thank you.
Close with these words of Jan Richardson. And the table will be wide, and the welcome will be wide, and the arms will open wide to gather us in, and our hearts will open wide to receive. And we will come as children who trust there is enough, and we will come unhindered and free. And our aching will be met with bread, and our sorrow will be met with wine. And we will open our hands to the feast without shame, and we will turn toward each other without fear, and we will give up our appetite for despair, and we will taste and know of delight. And we will become bread for a hungering world, and we will become drink for those who thirst, and the blessed will become the blessing, and everywhere will be a feast. Happy Easter, everyone.